crazier and crazier. But to me, I think the real story of the 21st century in America, how we went from the Clinton 90s to where we are today, in such a good place as a country. I mean, there were lots of problems, but we weren't on a national suicide like we are now. But to me, the real story is that the center became the radicals. And then there was nothing to glue the radicals back together. They lost any leg to stand on to be like, okay, that's a little bit too radical. That's a little bit too radical. Come back in the middle. So, which was basically the message of CNN through the entire Trump years. It was like, look, we don't want to go crazy socialist, and we definitely don't want to go crazy nationalist right wing. Let's just meet in the middle with Hillary Clinton and Lindsey Graham and the adults, in the room who have destroyed the entire country. And I look at it like this, right? Like, let's say, hypothetically, let's say we lived in a society that you, Joe Rogan, would consider a pretty decent society. Like, I'd say what you want. I don't even know exactly what that would be, but what you would be like, oh, this is a pretty normal society. We don't fight stupid wars. We're not all at each other's throats. There's good healthcare, good education. Like, it's a reasonably what Joe Rogan wants society. And so now you're the centrist who supports the status quo because you like the country. You like what the government's doing. You think this is all good. And then some radicals came to you and made proposals. Like, this is what I think we should do instead of this society that you have. And let's say one was the most radical left-winger that you know today, and one was the most radical right-winger that you know today, saying all of their crazy shit. And the left-wingers like, we should have the woke police and hate speech laws and all of this, and the right-wingers like, we should be nationalist and we should build a wall and we should, whatever it is. And then there was someone else who represents the neoliberal, neoconservative establishment order. And they came to you and they said, well, here's what I think we should do. I think we should attack 7 countries in the Middle East and slaughter millions of innocent people. I think we should spend ourselves $20 trillion into debt that we'll pass on to our children. I think we should build up a huge prison industrial complex and put people in there for nonviolent, victimless crimes. I think we should tax people and then bail out big banks and big corporations with the money. And you're just looking at these 3 people. Would it be obvious who the radical is? Would you look at the left-winger and the right-winger and say, well, that's really crazy, but this guy really has something to say? I think there's an argument that that's the most radical shit you could propose. So now those guys became the extremists, and now they have no leg to stand on to tell a radical leftist or a radical right-winger, well, you're being a little bit too radical. So like, fuck you, you're too radical. Look at this whole goddamn system. You inherited America and destroyed it. So who are you? And then, truthfully, Donald Trump, I think, signified fuck the whole establishment. And then he did such a bad job with it that he handed them back one last out, where Joe Biden could go, isn't normal a little bit better than this? Let's come back to normal. But the problem is that normal is all of that extremist radical shit that destroyed the country. So that's where we are now.
Isn't that crazy? Like, I saw so many people on Twitter saying it's so wonderful to have normalcy restored at the White House. It's like, he's going to bed at night at a normal time, and he's probably being loving to his wife and this. And you're like, okay, yeah. But what are we doing as a country overseas? Like, what is happening with the country? And there's always like it's crazy how there's always some new social event, some new thing that happens, whether it's George Floyd's death or the Capitol Hill attack, or there's always something where they can use that and invade more and more into people's lives and use the power of these ideologies and force them against each other. It's like there's so many people now that are on edge. And like after the Capitol Hill attack, like rightly so, like Jesus Christ, the fact that we got that close to these fucking maniacs literally almost killing representatives.
Yeah.
A guy, like, as crazy as it gets, right? A guy with war paint on and a fucking buffalo helmet is shirtless standing on the floor of the Senate.
It was a pretty wild scene.
Wild fucking scene. But is that our biggest problem? Like, what is our biggest problem? What our biggest problem? First of all, how the fuck did we get there? Like, what is getting us there? Is it social media? Like, what's accentuating this divide between us? And how come we can't see the argument laid out the way you just laid it out? How come we can't see, like, hey, look at what has gone on in the world by following this path that we think is like the standard path? we think is like normalcy. We think is like back to basics.
Well, it's because we're so like zoomed in. We're so like living in the 24-hour cycle, you know, of like what just happened or what just happened. I mean, like stories like the accusation that Donald Trump was colluding with a hostile foreign power is like, what? That's years ago. You know what I mean? Like, that's not even like, we're talking about what happened on the 6th of January when they invaded, you know. But if you just zoom out a little bit more and you're like, okay, but what really happened here? And why were the right-wingers willing to go with Donald Trump? And why are they willing to storm the Capitol?
Right.
And even if it's just a few hundred storming, the rest of them at least protesting, and tens of millions was legitimate at all. And why do they have such little faith in all of these institutions? And I think, again, you could zoom back very far, but just keeping it in the last 20 years, it's like, well, look at everything.
Yeah.
Look at what everything was. They fought all of these wars that everyone knows are bullshit. They've robbed the American people and just given all the money to huge corporations, the big banks. We have just incredible levels of corruption. I mean, just like baked into the cake now, where we have the society where there's like crazy low interest rates and crazy high government spending. So all of the new wealth, I mean, Bernie Sanders nails it when he talks about this, although I don't think he looks at those as the reasons. But it's like all of the new wealth coming in disproportionately goes to the top. The whole system is completely skewed toward the already powerful because you have low interest rates. So now you have a whole speculating economy where everyone's got to get in investments and stocks and bonds and try to make money that way. And so, of course, the Wall Street speculators make crazy profits. And then if they fail, they get bailed out. And you have record high government spending. So the politically connected are getting all of this fucking money. So regular people are just more and more starting to realize like, hey, this whole system is bullshit. And fuck it, I don't believe it anymore. And I think it bubbled over to a point on both sides, on the left and the right.
But then there's like, okay, well, I understand what you're saying, and you're making a lot of sense. But what's the solution? Like, how do we stop something like the Capitol Hill riot from ever happening again? How do we, here's another one. How do you clean up the police? Like, how do you fix this thing? I don't think defunding the police is right. I think you probably need to train them and make it much more difficult to become a cop, make it much more respectable. But how do you do that?
Okay.
How do you do that at this stage of the game? Because this is crazy.
The solution is libertarianism.